The suspension is over. Late night host Jimmy Kimmel is back with his ABC network late night talk show, but there's a big caveat. And here to weigh in on the state of the First Amendment and free speech in light of tonight's return is Northwestern University professor Heather Hendershot and Jessica Gonzalez, a lawyer and co-CEO of the Free Press, which is a nonprofit based out of Los Angeles. We see you there, Heather Hendershot. So I want to get your reaction. Do you believe Disney and ABC always planned to bring Kimmel back, or do you think the public outcry and the cancellation of Hulu and Disney streaming and the effect on the bottom line really made the difference?
Yeah, I think they gave themselves a little escape hatch, right, where they didn't just cancel him, they suspended him. And so, and that could have just been contractual, that they couldn't legally just immediately cancel him because of some kind of contract stuff. But it wasn't inevitable, and it does clearly seem to be a response to this pressure from canceling Disney, canceling Hulu, them literally seeing the Google numbers go up for the phrase cancel Hulu, cancel Disney. So, it was not inevitable that he got back on the air, and it's kind of wonderful and amazing that he did.
And, we still have Sinclair and Nexstar, as you look at Jimmy Kimmel there. These are giant media companies that own stations across the country that carry ABC network content. They're saying they're not going to air Kimmel immediately. How do you see that playing out given the economics of how the TV industry works?
Wow. Yeah, they control so much of ABC's local market, and it really messes with what you think you mean by local. You think that's going to be, the citizens in a certain community are in charge of the programming in that community. And of course, they are not when you have these giant companies owning so many local stations. It makes it really hard to push back because, like, the Disney boycott was pretty effective, right? Very quickly. How do you boycott Sinclair or Nexstar, your local station? Like, who do you single out? Because there's lots of advertisers. You're not going to have an effective, easy campaign against General Motors and a healthcare provider and 4 or 5 other people who advertise during those shows. So it's a really difficult situation, and most people don't really know what affiliates are versus O&Os, owned and operated by the networks. It's a kind of somewhat arcane understanding of broadcast history, and the state of the industry is required. And it might feel kind of insider baseball to a lot of people to be worried about Sinclair and Nexstar. But people should be concerned. We've seen in the past that Sinclair is very right-wing, that they famously in 2017, there was this compilation reel that went viral of a script they sent to all of their affiliates. And they said, you must repeat the script, exactly as written. And they did a little speech about fake news as it was understood by President Trump at the time. And they, were totally bending the knee and obeying. And luckily someone noticed this and put in a compilation of like 30 different stations and how they were all doing it at the same time. And it was informative and also, entertaining, which is how you kind of get to a lot of people with your ideas.
I remember when that happened, and I remember there were reporters that decided to opt out of that because they were very concerned about the precedent that was setting. And now we're joined by Jessica Gonzalez. Thanks, Jessica. You're out there in LA, the co-CEO of Free Press, also an attorney. So I'll pose that question that I posed Professor Hendershot to you. Do you think that the public outcry, the economics of this made the difference, or do you buy the notion that ABC just wanted to cool the temperature for a couple days?
I don't buy it. I think they were genuinely surprised by the level of public outcry. We had 400 celebrities on Monday calling for Kimmel's reinstatement. I think, we saw even Senator Ted Cruz, famous conservative from Texas, calling Brendan Carr out, saying that he was acting like he was one of the good fellas. So I think we saw bipartisan concern about the overstep and about the federal government through Brendan Carr at the FCC and Donald Trump saying, we are going to mess with broadcast licensees if they dissent or say something we don't like. And I think that, the public was rightly outraged by what was happening. And now we're seeing Sinclair and Nexstar hold back airing Kimmel. I think we ought to be concerned about that. If you go to our website at freepress.net, you can take action. There's a tool there where you can call your local Sinclair or Nexstar station and protest and ask for them to put Jimmy Kimmel back on the air. I think it's really important that we focus on those outlets because they are not household names, but they are some of the largest broadcasters in the country. In fact, they have way more broadcast stations than ABC does. So we have to be looking at this not just in terms of whether or not we can see Kimmel tonight. If you stream Disney Plus, you can. 75% of American households can watch Kimmel tonight. But the point is, we shouldn't allow the government to quell speech.
And
So that's why we are continuing to activate, and we're actually calling on Congress to bring Brendan Carr up for an oversight hearing.
And Brendan Carr, the FCC chairman, who was very ubiquitous on some friendly interviews, basically stating, he said to ABC, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. So insinuating, and Trump, by the way, pretty directly insinuating that they were responsible for what had happened, which caused, as you mentioned, even Republicans like Ted Cruz to say the FCC, we do not want them policing speech this way. But Heather, remind us about the economics. You bring up Sinclair, you bring up Nexstar, and again, some of the 101 of the TV business. You know, this company, Fox, owns this station, owns the stations in the big markets. But then in some of the mid-sized markets, it's different companies that own those stations, like Sinclair and Nexstar, and they broadcast ABC content or NBC content. They have a license agreement. But will it cost Sinclair and Nexstar, do you believe, Heather, to not carry this show? Whose bottom line gets hurt more by this?
Yeah, that's a good question. What I've noticed in particular about Nexstar and Sinclair and their plan not to show Kimmel and instead to show a news broadcast, a news show. What I've noticed is a lot of people aren't asking like, well, what news show? What are they going to show? Is it going to be One America News? Is it going to be Newsmax? And ultimately, the fallout from that may be not selling as much advertising time, not as quite as much profit, but a kind of ideological gain on their part. So yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it's important to remember too that local stations have in the past done some pretty unprogressive things in response to the national feed. I mean, during the civil rights movement in the Deep South, there were a lot of stations that would literally preempt the national news feed if they didn't like an editorial. When Thurgood Marshall went on the air to talk about Brown v. Board of Education in the 50s, they preempted him and they put a sign up on the screen that said, sorry, cable trouble, as if there was a technical difficulty. So the local is not always the most progressive when it's genuinely local compared to Sinclair and Nexstar. And I think it helps to have that context. But this is, an even worse situation because of their nationwide reach and the profit motive.
All right, I want to bring up some other news that came out today, Jessica, especially, Republicans have harped on the issue that Google today agreed to reinstate controversial voices that had been deplatformed from YouTube at the request of the then Biden administration for spreading COVID-19 misinformation. Do you put that in the same box in terms of a government attempt at censorship as what had happened here with ABC?
Well, my understanding is the facts are in dispute about whether or not the Biden administration directed or asked Google to deplatform those people. Here's how I see it. Private companies have a right to regulate content as they see fit. What is not okay is the government saying there are going to be consequences if you do or don't air a certain type of content. That is what's happening with the Trump administration right now. That is no doubt part of the reason why Sinclair and Nexstar are withholding this broadcast, because there is still regulatory threat coming from the FCC boss, where they have a merger pending in Nexstar's case and regulatory favors pending in Sinclair's case. I think we got to stay focused on that. And YouTube has to make decisions about whether or not it wants to bring people on who spread hate and lies. That too has been shown to be bad for business. People don't want hate and lies showing up in their advertisements.
All right. And we should bring up that aspect of it is that Sinclair and Nexstar have these big deals that will have to get FCC approval, these big economic deals, in the case of Nexstar wanting to buy a lot of stations. Okay, so Jessica Gonzalez, Heather Hendershot, thank you so much for joining us again. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
And after the break, free hot dogs, thanks to the Bears' star quarterback.